Read your thoughts. From the future.
The movies of 1985.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to episode 3 of the movies of 1985. My name is Jason Hutchins, and in this podcast I use a bingo machine to select one of 52 movies that I put together. I put together a list in late 2024. So I randomly select one of those movies to watch every week and then discuss it along with news and things like that from 1985, because I happen to be stuck in 1985. My flux capacitor, it's just stopped working. I don't have the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity I need to power it to get back to 2025 where you're listening to me from. But that's fine because all sorts of crazy things are happening in 2025, I've heard. The United States is getting a new president any day now. So I'm avoiding all that and taking refuge in the 1985, 40 years ago. So there's some sad news to start this week's episode. Firstly, David Lynch has passed away. Now, as you know, or as you might know, I've been reading Usenet, or basically I've been reading old Usenet. So that was the Reddit of 1985, if you like. And on net.movies, everyone's been talking about June, which was recently released, which of course David Lynch directed. But also last season's podcast, The Movies of 1999, David Lynch's movie The Straight Story was one of the undiscovered gems. We voted for our undiscovered gem at the during the final movie night of the year, and quite a few people put their sticker on The Straight Story just to indicate that they thought it was a really good movie that they'd never watched before. So R.I.P. David Lynch, I've really enjoyed your work. I loved Twin Peaks and Twin Peaks The Return as well. But as well as that, we've had an Australian legend pass away this week, Simon Townsend. Now, when I was a kid, I watched a lot of Simon Townsend's Wonderworld. That was on the TV in 1985. After school, you'd see that on. That was a very interesting show. It was kind of a news magazine style show for children where they would send reporters around the country and even overseas, and the reporters would file stories about all sorts of things that kids might find interesting. A lot of mundane things, everyday things that you might not even see reported these days. But of course, there was no internet or people didn't have the internet at home. There were no mobile phones and things like that. So you discover a lot of things by watching Wonderworld. He had a lot of reporters working for him. Some names include Jonathan Coleman, who's also passed away. He became quite well known as a radio DJ in the UK, I think. Edith Bliss, but there were a lot of reporters. Each reporter would go out with a cinematographer operating a 16mm film camera and a sound engineer, and basically put these stories together themselves, having a lot of leeway in terms of how they did that. And they'd file those stories. I think I watched an episode from 1985 when I heard the news that Simon Townsend had passed away. In the end credits of the show, they had 5 film editors cutting these stories together. And apparently in each, because there was an episode every weekday, each week they were filming and editing a feature film's length worth of a 16mm film. They put to air 2,000 episodes over the lifetime of that series. And typically there would be a couple of reports that Simon, he would sit at his desk with his bloodhound Woodrow, I think his name was, and he would introduce each story and then throw to the reporter. And then at the end, there might be a music video or something. Now, the first In Excess music video was made by Simon Townsend and Wonderworld for a song called Simon Says. And they used to play that. That was probably quite a bit earlier than 1985. But then he would end the episode by maybe showing some mail that he had received from one of the kids that watches the show. And then he'd send them some prizes in the mail, like some books and hobby kits and stuff like that. I also really liked another Simon Townsend show called TV with James Valentine that aired on the ABC in that pre-news slot in the early 90s. So anyway, RIP to Simon Townsend as well. So two big names from my childhood as well are passing away in 1 week. But for now, what we're going to do is go straight to the bingo machine. It has 52 balls in. We've already had number 18 and number 40 over the last 2 weeks. So let's roll it now and see which number comes out for this week. So the number's out and it is number 17. Oh, we had 18 and now 17 straight before it. So let's have a look at the spreadsheet and see what that is. Well, number 17 is a movie called Cocoon. Now, Cocoon, that might be a Ron Howard movie, I think, from memory. And it's got Steve Guttenberg in, and it's about an old people's home where they discover immortality because they hatch alien eggs in the swimming pool or something. It's one of these movies that I've not watched for a very long time. I last watched it on VHS. Now, for you people in the future, it has a score on Rotten Tomatoes of 82%, but you cannot rent this movie anywhere. You can't get it for love or money. I'm not sure why, or actually I have an idea why, and I'll research that and talk about it with you later. So you might just have to download it from Internet Archive if you want to watch along with me. But for now, for me, stuck in 1985, I've got to pop down to the local video store to rent it. So I'll put the TV on so you've got something to watch while I'm away, probably ads, and I'll be back soon to watch the movie with you.
Here's an offer you've just got to try.
McDonald's McChicken with a free thigh.
With every 2 or 3 piece pack of chicken and French fries.
You get a free thigh.
And that's no lie.
A delicious,
Succulent.
tender thigh.
Free with every 2
All 3-piece pack
of McChicken.
and French fries you buy.
This offer is for a limited time.
So you
Okay,
better
I'm
buy.
back.
If you want to
Let me
try,
just put this in,
McDonald's McChicken with a free fry.
and I'll pause the video when it starts there. And well, this was a hard movie to track down even in 1985. I had to go over to Jumbo Video in Bicton to find it. But it's even harder to get it in the future where you guys are listening from. And I did a little bit of research. Didn't really discover anything, but I'll describe it briefly. But before I do that, let me just look at the video cassette cover. So on the front, we've got Cocoon, a nice logo. The C and the O are all styled similarly, and the double O intersects and looks a little bit like the infinity symbol. And I guess that makes sense if it's a movie about discovering immortality. The photo on the cover itself is of a dock, a boat at a jetty, with the night sky and the moon visible, and then a glowing something from underneath the surface. Now, the tagline is, "It is everything you've dreamed of. It is nothing you expect." And the little synopsis is, when a group of trespassing seniors swim in a pool containing alien cocoons, they find themselves energized with youthful vigor. Now, Steve Guttenberg and Brian Dennehy are in the cast. They're probably the 2 actors I know the most, but there are a bunch of others. And it is directed by Ron Howard, as I thought. So there you go, that's Cocoon. Now, why is it so hard to get in 2025? So there is a blog post on a site called UpRocks. The title of that is Our Long Arduous Attempt to Watch Cocoon and Why Some Classic Movies Seemingly Just Vanish, which is something that I've experienced doing this podcast both seasons. It's really hard to get hold of some movies, even movies that have won Oscars. Now, he goes through, the author's name is Mike Ryan, he goes through this whole rigmarole trying to get hold of Cocoon, eventually buying a second-hand copy on DVD from 2004, and that's how he watched it in 2020 on a 2004 DVD. But he did go into a lot of detail. He contacted Disney trying to find out why it's not available on their streaming service, even though that they should have the rights to it. He even emailed Steve Guttenberg, whose representative replied to say that he doesn't want to discuss Cocoon, but he wanted to pass around a script that he'd written about Hurricane Katrina, which is interesting to see what Steve Guttenberg is doing these days. I haven't really kept up with his career. Disney did eventually reply, but basically just to say that they're still looking into it. And after 6 months of waiting, he gave up. But after publishing the story, and a source with knowledge of the film got in touch with him anonymously to say that the reason why Cocoon is not available on any streaming services is that the music used in the movie has not been cleared for streaming or transnational sales, which seems a little bit petty, doesn't it? I mean, this is a movie that was reasonably popular at the time, and you just cannot get hold of it. So in the future, I hope that you have gotten a hold of it, because I'm going to press play on tape now, and I will play the trailer for you, but I am going to watch all 117 minutes of the movie Cocoon, just under 2 hours, and once it's done, I'll be back with my thoughts. So let's begin.
From the farthest corner of a distant galaxy and the deepest feelings of the human soul comes a fantasy to fill your heart.
I feel tremendous. I'm ready to take on the world. Ow! Ow!
It is everything you've dreamed of. It is nothing you expect.
Oh, I can keep a secret. I wouldn't tell anybody.
It's hard to know who to trust.
It is the mystery of an awesome secret. It is the miracle of everlasting life.
We'll never be sick. We won't get any older, and we won't ever die.
Beyond the innocence of youth and the wisdom of age lies the wonder of Cocoon. 20th Century Fox presents the new film from the producers of Jaws and the director of Splash. Cocoon.
Wow. That is a bad movie. I'm going to give that 2.5 stars on Letterboxd. I must admit, I must have had the nostalgia goggles on when I added that to my list. Now, just right at the end of the trailer there, they said that it was by the director of Splash, and that's Ron Howard, of course. Splash is interesting to me because it was the first film that I saw on our first VCR that we bought for our family down at Retrovision in Fremantle. And I remember that my dad couldn't connect the VCR to the TV, so me and my brothers had to help him. And we eventually just got a black and white picture from it, and he was quite keen just to watch Splash, which was the first cassette that we rented, without getting the colour signal working. Because back in those days, before the RCA cables, you had to tune it in as if it was another TV station. In fact, our TV was made out of wood, which is kind of crazy, and the remote control was this massive brick of a thing that only had 2 buttons. One was to toggle mute on and off, and one was to go to the next TV channel. That didn't matter too much because there were only 3 TV channels at the time, and we thought it was great. I remember the remote control used some sort of sonar signal. You could put it to your ear and hear this high-pitched noise whenever you pressed a button. Anyway, that's all by the by. Let me give you the first 10 minutes or so of the movie. So it starts with this little boy named David, who is played by Barrett Oliver. He's also in Neverending Story and another movie from 1985 called Daryl, which is not on my list. He's looking through a telescope at the moon, but then his mum calls him inside. Just as the camera flies past the moon towards the Earth, through the clouds and into the ocean, where dolphins are staring up at light coming from above. And as it descends into the ocean, you see these underwater ruins. And then we cut to the Sunny Shores Retirement Village in Florida, where one of the retirees, Ben, played by Wilfred Brimley, who was actually only 49 years old at the time of filming, but he's made up to look like he's about 80 years old. He's handing out groceries from the boot of his car, and it just shows Rose not remembering who he was, even though she's one of his friends. So just putting you into their shoes of getting old and forgetting things, or getting dementia or whatever. And it just basically gives a little overview of their life in the retirement community. David, the boy from the beginning, is Ben's grandson, and he comes and visits. He's really close to his grandfather, friends with everyone in the retirement village. A little bit like is it Howl's Moving Castle, or one of the Studio Ghibli movies, or maybe, I'm trying to think. Maybe that's Ponyo, isn't it? Anyway, it sort of shows their life in the retirement village and so forth. And David's parents are divorced, which maybe is why he's closer to his grandfather. We then cut to Jack, played by Steve Guttenberg. He's out on a boat. He runs a charter business, and he has an altercation with a customer. But then a new customer, Brian Dennehy, playing Walter, he comes up and hires the boat for 27 days, which is a massive cash cow for Jack. 27 days brings us up to the next lunar eclipse, which has some significance. Now, Walter is in a group of four very attractive-looking people, apart from Walter. And there's a woman in his crew called Kitty. Now, she's played by Tani Welsh, the daughter of Raquel Welch, and Jack takes a liking to her. Anyway, the old folks see him unloading stuff from the boat, and also, I should say that the old folks see Brian Dennehy hiring an empty house that's near the retirement community, and 3 of the members of the retirement community have been sneaking into the indoor pool of the house to have a swim. They are named Art Ben, the grandfather, and Joe, and their partners are Mary, Ulma and Bess, and all 6 of them end up going for a swim later on in the movie. Now, when they do go for a swim, there's these mollusk-encrusted, egg-shaped things on the bottom of the swimming pool, and the old folk also saw Walter, Brian Dennehy's character, unloading them from the boat. So they start to put 2 and 2 together. When they go for a swim for the first time, they find that they feel great and revitalised, and so the plot thickens. Now, this is really trying to be an E.T. or a Close Encounters kind of movie, but it's just ridiculous. Like the alien special effects are really shonky. They look like they're just actors dressed up in a very bad costume, staring directly into the camera with this stunned mullet expression on their face. The movie also has a ridiculous breakdancing sequence where one of the old folks, because he's all revitalised, he finds that he can breakdance perfectly and get all the kids to give him a round of applause. In a Seinfeld reference, you see all of the old Jewish ladies in the retirement community playing mahjong, which is a bit of a thing down in Florida. And even though it is sort of very cheesy movie that I didn't enjoy very much, there are some nice scenes. There's a very touching scene between Rose and Bernie as they near the end of their lives. Bernie chooses not to participate in the whole swimming pool scene. I also found one of the orderlies at the retirement village very funny. He's this really weird-looking guy, and he makes some funny quips here and there. Turns out that his name is Clint Howard, and he's the weird younger brother of the director Ron Howard. And Ron Howard was chosen to direct after the movie's producers rejected Robert Zemeckis because Romancing the Stone hadn't performed very well. Now, Robert Zemeckis, of course, would go on to direct the quintessential 1985 movie that we'll be watching later on this year. But anyway, I don't want to dwell too long on this. I think my 80s memories of this movie were enough. I didn't have to re-watch it. I think back in the 80s, the critics and my parents would have enjoyed this movie because there were a lot of these older actors from the 40s and 50s on screen together. And young kids my age, 13 years old, would have enjoyed this movie because it was aliens and spaceships and stuff like that. But rewatching it now, you just see the effects have not aged well, and unbelievably, this movie won the Oscar for Best Special Effects. It actually beat Young Sherlock Holmes, and the effects in Young Sherlock Holmes have definitely aged better, but Industrial Light and Magic did both, and I feel like the special effects budget for Cocoon was quite a bit less than for young Sherlock Holmes. There was a second Oscar for this movie. Don Amici, he played one of the old dudes, Art, I think. He won Best Supporting Actor, so it's a double Oscar winner, but the effects are cheesy, the score is a bit blah, and the acting, for the most part, was not great. Gutenberg's not a fantastic actor. I think it was not very good, and it's definitely worth a cactus. This is not Mintox. It's a cactus. Just believe me when I say that I watched this so you don't have to and avoid it. What's especially crazy is they went ahead and made a cash grab sequel a couple of years later that defeats the whole premise of this movie because it's all meant to be a metaphor for death. You know, people going away forever and never being able to get back in touch with you again. The fact that they made a sequel where they returned home after a couple of years to say hi to everyone is kind of ridiculous. Anyway, I don't want to dwell any more on this. It's Cactus, and now let's move on to something completely different.
I'm driving along and I'm just singing my song. I'm in a news-free zone.
Well, welcome to the News-Free Zone, everybody, and this is a time of the podcast where we go back and look at what was happening in the world 40 years ago as a bit of an antidote to what is happening in the world these days. But unfortunately, as we all know, a divisive right-wing president who's very old and who came from a non-political background, famous for being in movies and TV and stuff like that, has just been inaugurated for the second time on a bitterly cold January 20th that forced the ceremony indoors. And yes, I'm talking about Ronald Reagan, inaugurated for the second time on January 20th, 1985, on a very cold, historically cold morning. Now, of course, history might repeat itself, but we don't worry about that on the News-Free Zone. Another thing that happened on week 3 of January 1985 is Peter Ueberroth was named Time Magazine's Man of the Year. Now, Time Magazine only switched to their gender-neutral Person of the Year in 1999, and I think it was even some time after that before they awarded the first Person of the Year to a woman. But who's Peter Ueberroth, you might ask? Well, he was the organiser of the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. And those Olympic Games, even though the Soviet Union boycotted, they were credited with revitalising the modern Olympics. And I remember quite clearly watching the 1984 Olympics on television, especially the opening ceremony and closing ceremony. The opening ceremony had 84 grand pianos being played simultaneously. They were playing Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. All of these pianists dressed up as if they were in like a concert hall, playing 84 grand pianos. And then a guy on a jetpack came in and flew around the stadium, which was very sci-fi and very futuristic. And I reckon in 2025 you just don't see enough jetpacks, do you? The closing ceremony featured Lionel Richie singing all night long, with breakdancers doing their breakdancing thing, so that's a bit of a callback to Cocoon, along with what happened after that, which is a spaceship descended from the sky, and there was a bit of a close encounters moment with communication between the ground and the spaceship, with musical notes, before the aliens arrived and brought on the fireworks. So very vivid memories from my childhood there. In this week in 1985, Playboy announced it would no longer staple the centerfold to the middle of its magazines, which is a bit of that's what they were all about, weren't they? I won't go into any stories around that. Also, the British pound sank to its historic lowest low ever against the US dollar of $1.07, which impacted the prices of imported technology, including things like Commodore 64s and disk drives and monitors. And if you're wondering why people in the US tended to have disk drives and monitors for their Commodore 64s, and people in the UK didn't. That's probably because in Margaret Thatcher's Britain, the British pound wasn't worth very much. In this week as well, Bruce Springsteen's single Born in the USA peaked at number 9 on the charts, which you might find a bit surprising since it's such a well-known song, but that's as high as it got. I thought it would have been a number 1. And also the 19th Super Bowl took place in California. Now, I'm not really very knowledgeable about American sports ball, but I do recognize the name Joe Montana because he got MVP. But the big thing about Super Bowl, of course, was the TV ads. And in 1984, Microsoft famously launched their 1984 ad announcing the Macintosh, directed by Ridley Scott. In 1985, they followed that up with a Lemmings ad where you saw a line of office workers with their briefcases jumping off a cliff because they were all following Microsoft, and they announced Macintosh Office. So the final office worker in the line realizes the error of his ways and he doesn't jump and turns around and looks into the sunrise and realizes that, yes, he's going to use a Mac. There was also an interesting ad from Pacific Bell, which was basically a minute of Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, speculating about the future of technology and telecommunications, saying that it's going to create a more human world because all of these advances in technology would give us more time and more freedom to do the things that we want to do, and bugger it, but look at how everything turned out 40 years later, eh? Anyway, on to Usenet news. So last week I talked about Project Stargate. This week it has just been a total flame war between the Project Stargate organisers and people who are throwing all sorts of criticisms at their way, especially Frank Adrian at Hercules, whatever that was. He basically cross-posted to all the news groups telling people that Stargate would spell the end of the net as we know it and would destroy the net, and to save the net, we've got to stop Stargate. He also used a lot of rude words and made threats against people, which caused all sorts of backlash. Now, the reason for his criticisms is that the people organising Project Stargate thought that all messages that go over the satellite service should be moderated because there would be a risk that some messages might contain statements made by people that would cause the carrier to be sued for libel. So they wanted to moderate all messages, and that became a big anti-censorship thing. So a lot of people replied to Frank saying that he should wash his mouth out with soap and things like that. But basically there's just a bigger ongoing flame war that I'm following. Now, all of this might have led to the great renaming of 1987, where, like the Usenet as I'm reading in 1985, there's only 3 top-level groups. They are Net, Mod, and FAR, FA, which is for news imported from the ARPANET. So Net is basically unmoderated and Mod is moderated. But in 1987, there's the great renaming where we get 8 top-level news groups, and they are Comp, Humanities, Misc, News, Rec, Sci, Soc, and Talk. And then they added Alt later on, and regional top-level news groups such as Oz for Australia. And then moderation was on a newsgroup by newsgroup basis, just implied by the name of the newsgroup. But basically, Usenet remained largely unmoderated, and I'm only reading the net hierarchy at the moment because it's much more interesting than the mod hierarchy. So that's where all, people are completely unconstrained and they can say whatever they want. Now, over in net.politics, people are talking about Ronald Reagan deporting illegal asylum seekers. So that sort of has some mirrors to what's happening today in Trump world. So these asylum seekers were coming from El Salvador, but the Reagan administration classified them as economic refugees, which means that they could get deported. So what happened is a whole bunch of churches, over 150 congregations across the country, started harbouring these asylum seekers so that they wouldn't get deported. They were known as the Sanctuary Movement. And the government in an operation called Operation Sojourner, sent operatives or paid informants into these churches to gather intel, and that led 16 religious leaders being charged in what were known as the Sanctuary Trials. Now, this movement, the Sanctuary movement, had a lot of public support. So I learned about all of this and went down a rabbit hole because it was posted by someone in jest where they were sort of thanking the Reagan administration, but they didn't end their post with a /s sarcasm tag or a smiley or anything like that. But it clearly was posted as sarcasm, which led me to realise that I've never seen a smiley after reading all of these 1985 Usenet posts. So I did see a post where someone talked about the smiley as it being a thing, but I've never seen it being used in anger. So what else happened this week? Well, net.games.hack was created to discuss the hack game, which is based on Rogue, I think, and that was released in late 1984. Also in net.micro, people were talking about Atari's CES showing, and especially focusing on a productivity suite that they announced and demoed that was called Infinity. And that was hyper optimized to run on 8-bit computers and 16-bit computers with very small memory footprints. And it had a database, a word processor, a graphics program, and all sorts of stuff. But it was never released. So a bit of vaporware, but that was the big buzz at the time. And finally, in net.puzzle, Spencer Bowles posted a question that was raised by a programmer friend of his who claimed that computers will stop working in the year 2000 because dates will wrap over. These 2-digit years will wrap over. So this is the first time I've seen someone mention the Y2K problem right back in 1985. And he said that his programmer friend had even lost sleep over this, but Spencer himself refuses to believe that it's possible. So he was just asking whether it was going to happen. And that's all the news from 40 years ago, and I hope that's taken your mind off what's happened in the news this week in 2025. But, sorry, Bailey, my dog's just jumped onto the desk next to me and is licking my face. You crazy dog, Bailey. Anyway, I'll see you next week, and remember, the world really is wonderful.
If you believe anything can happen, if you believe anything is possible, then you belong with me. So let your mind run free. If you believe we're all a little crazy, if you believe in giving everything your best thing, you belong with me. So let your mind run free. Inside a bubble. If you believe that dreams are there for those who try them,